I'm an AP fanboy. I love my Royal Oak, or Oaks, yet I bought a Vacheron. Let's check it out. First, I want to make it clear that this video is not a review because there is going to be some degree of bias somewhere. I paid for this watch and own it, so it's going to be a deep dive into why I like it. This is the Vacheron Constantin Overseas Reference 4500V. Right off the bat, I have to commend how feature-packed this watch is, which makes it clear as to what you are paying for. Both the case and movement are Geneva hallmark finished. As expected, the polish and brush surfaces are immaculate. Even satin depths throughout and clean transitions into the mirrored faces, so you don't have some areas where the brushing is slightly tilted or deeper in its edge, and no spillover of polished surfaces into the satin that gives off a mushy appearance. But the real beauty is what's inside. The in-house 5100 caliber features a hand-engraved, not machine-stamped, 22-karat gold rotor and is by far one of the nicest oscillating weights I've seen. There's multiple levels of finishing, a smooth satin rim followed by a media blast intermediary, and possibly a hand-chiseled interior that accentuates the raised polished compass design. Whew, that's a mouthful. And this is just the rotor. The actual bridges are decorated with hand englazing to black mirror polish and Côte de Genève finishing throughout that isn't stamped, so an abrasive wheel is utilized for each row. Obviously, each screw head and even the regulator cap are black polished, which makes this movement such an eye-catcher from up close and afar. What I love is the sheer amount of hand finishing present. Most watches of similar price are decorated primarily by machine, given very nicely done, so you probably can't tell the difference, but they don't demonstrate the same level of appreciation. I'm much more intrigued by the fact that this bevel was finished by a watchmaker starting at 800 grit all the way up to compound infused pegwood. The end result may be the same, but the execution is something that I also care about. But I think it's important to emphasize that even this can't be compared to the best out there. If you look really close, there may be imperfections, of course a lot less likely from VC when compared to brands like Rolex, but it won't be the same prestige as watches from the likes of Grupo Forsey or Roger W. Smith. So when I talk about finishing, it's all relative to what's typically found at particular price points. Now I can't talk about the Overseas without mentioning the dial. It is one of the most interesting dials made in my opinion, and also the most difficult to capture on camera. It is a nightmare to bring as much justice as possible. It's not like a sunburst layer, but rather a deep blue that almost looks like thinned out enamel. The best way I can describe it is, imagine a black polished metal base and pouring a layer of translucent blue paint on top. It has a rich and deep hue that introduces tons of depth into this face. It's very three-dimensional and unlike most conventional dials. Now, unlike the Overseas competitors, not only do you get a pretty face, but also a very respectable degree of reliability. There's a paramagnetic ring around the movement to protect it against magnetism. The ISO 764 standard is 60 Gauss, but this watch is resistant up to 400. Now, this isn't as high as compared to the Milgauss's 1000 Gauss rating. You can cover the entire movement with an iron plate to significantly increase the resistance, but the Overseas has a sapphire display and you can't even see the paramagnetic ring. Of course, water resistance is just as important, if not more to some of us, and the Overseas has a 150 meter rating. This will cover everything that an average person will need, so you can go swimming knowing that your watch is safe. One of the key traits of the Overseas that I love is the amount of innovation present, most notably the bracelet changing mechanism, and the fact that other brands are following suit, like AP's new offshore line, demonstrates how useful it can be. I can't express enough how awesome this feature is. To have a steel sports watch with an integrated bracelet that can easily be swapped out for rubber or leather makes the Overseas so much more fun. As incredible as the bracelet is, the Overseas also comes with 2 additional straps, alligator and rubber, along with a deploying clasp. So if I want to change straps midday, it's no longer a hassle or time-consuming process, which is the biggest barrier to changing out a strap for me. Of course, traditional spring bars are easy to manipulate, but the fact that I don't need a tool and the fact that the whole process can be done in a matter of seconds makes this process so much more inviting. The user experience is elevated, which is always welcome. Through this watch, I can see Vacheron's desire to constantly improve, and they nailed it on the 3rd gen. Taking a look at the Overseas Gen 1, 2, and 3, I think VC had this thought process going on. Gen 1, we might have a good idea. Gen 2, people like the watch, so we need to make it better. Let's put everything that we can into this. Gen 3, okay, let's take a step back. really examine and improve the design while also adding desirable features. Hence, we have the 4500V. I know I'm throwing a lot of praise, so clearly there is going to be bias somewhere, as I've mentioned at the start of the video. Again, I bought this watch because I like it, but I find it annoying to constantly hear everyone say how underrated the overseas is. It's not as bad when these claims come from actual first-hand experience, but it's annoying to hear this being said from those who merely like to root for the underdog. Labeling the overseas as the underdog means it's always being compared to, obviously, to the Royal Oak and Nautilus. There's nothing wrong with comparisons because they can be useful, but I find too much of this is being put on the overseas to the point where its individual merits aren't being appreciated. The Royal Oak is better because the overseas doesn't have a matching date wheel, but the overseas has a micro adjust on the bracelet, unlike the Royal Oak is better because the overseas doesn't have bidirectional winding, but the overseas has 3 times the water resistance. The Royal Oak is better because it was designed by Gerald Genta. That has nothing to do with the actual quality. No, the Royal Oak is better. The Royal Oak is better because the basically the overseas isn't being appreciated for being the overseas, rather it's often appreciated for being the alternative, which I feel is just a sack of shit. There are people who buy the overseas just because the other models aren't accessible. Oh, I can't get the Royal Oak, so I'll just get the overseas. Like, my guy, you aren't settling by getting the overseas. You are getting an incredible watch on its own. As a lucky owner of both, I can confidently say that neither one is better or worse than the other. I prefer the Royal Oak, but that's not because it's a better watch. It's only based on my personal preference of design. I actually think the overseas is the more functional offering. So why did I buy the overseas if I like the look of the Royal Oak? This is something that I'm constantly being asked, which is the result of the problem I mentioned before. I own them both because of their individual strengths and weaknesses, not the strengths and weaknesses relative to each other. One offers things that the other does not, which doesn't mean that one is better as a whole. First, overall design, and it's much easier to explain if I include the Nautilus here. The Royal Oak has a super industrial vibe where the design is mostly comprised of straight edges. The Nautilus, on the opposite end of the spectrum, is made of very round and organic curves. The overseas sits somewhere in between the industrial look of the Royal Oak and the organic flow of the Nautilus. It's made of both straight and curved edges. Next will be individual features, move and finishing techniques, not the finishing itself. Machine or hand finished, you will not be able to tell the difference, but one has hand polished bevels and the other has machine finished bevels. Bracelet mechanism. One offers quick change function, screws for every single link so sizing is more flexible, and a hidden adjustment on the clasp. The other produces a unique wrist experience in terms of feel and the way light interacts with the 3-piece link construction. More flashy bling bling going on, basically. Dial construction. The Royal Oak provides the intricate tapestry texture that's produced from a pantograph, a mimicry engine. The overseas offers a clean yet very deep looking face, so basically depth, like a black hole, or in this case a blue hole. Actual sport capability. To put it simply, the Royal Oak is 50 meters water resistant, the overseas 150 meters. Pretty self-explanatory. But another important factor to consider is the size. The Royal Oak comes in 41, 39, 37, and 34 millimeters that all look the same regardless of the size you pick. The overseas comes in 41 or 37, but the 37 does not look like the 41. It has a sub-seconds register at 9 and no fractional second chaptering marker. So it's not about is it better or worse than the other. The question should be, which package of features do you prefer? It's a shame that the overseas is bashed for not having features found on the Royal Oak or Nautilus, because the overseas has features that neither of those two watches have, basically overlooking what it has because of what it doesn't. I didn't mention much about the Nautilus aside from its looks because I simply do not own one or have any first-hand experience with it. I don't believe in analyzing something I haven't experienced because that wouldn't provide any value to you guys. But in terms of the two that I can speak towards from first-hand experience, the Royal Oak and overseas are on equal pedestals. It's just that one is super hyped right now, but this doesn't mean that the other is less of a watch. It's so important to avoid falling into the BS social stigmas and instead analyze the individual potential of a watch through your own senses. I really like both of these watches and can't really say one is objectively better than the other. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Do follow me on Instagram at loom_shot, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. This one is already going for a crazy premium, but this one is getting up there now. Just saying. Man, that's so cool. How? They give you 3 straps and a deployant. Alright, that's enough.
My guy.